So yes, thanks for coming tonight. I kind of appreciate it's very close to Christmas, and that there's shopping to be done. So a very special thanks for coming in that respect. This is our last Art of Digital London, our third Art of Digital London for 2014, and yeah, we're going to have plenty more coming up in 2015. We have a few plans. So what I'm going to do is just explain, like I do usually, the reasoning behind why we chose this theme, and then we're going to have 3 different speakers come up and explore the theme a wee bit further. So the way that we came to this theme was through the conclusion in a report that we wrote recently called a Multi-Channel Network for the Arts. So it's kind of responding to the recent Arts Council Commission. And that report looked at arts video online and new media distribution models in environments such as YouTube. So towards the end of that, it's quite a long one, but it would be nice if you had time to read it. Towards the end of it, in the conclusion, we kind of came to a few points in asking, was this model suitable for cultural organisations? And we posited that yes, it was a good model, and it would be a good opportunity to experiment in ways of, experiment in online environments, so ways that organisations could become kind of hybrid organisations. Because it's still something that's seen as quite difficult, and I think, we've been doing Art of Digital London now for 6 years, and it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem as people, as arts organisations, come to experiment in it more. And so, so we've called the event, hopefully, Subscribe, Share, Comment. And the reason why we call that is because these kind of actions describe how we come to and engage in art on a daily basis through things like social media, and very much so on things like our smartphones. These actions, they kind of inform the way that we as individuals build relationships to others online, and others as that includes organisations as individual users. They inform the value we place in those relationships, so who we view as important within those areas. They inform the kind of shape and type of content that we can consume in those areas, so things that are kind of serialized, because it comes in this big feed, if you imagine. Things that are serialized, shareable, and participatory. And they also inform what we expect of the relationships that we have online, so ways that we expect to interact and feedback to each other. So we've come up with this rather genius word, which I'm sure loads of people have heard before, dashboarding. And so Tom's going to give a proper introduction to that in a bit. And so it's just to try and pin down a word that describes this experience that we all have. So Tom's going to introduce that, and then after that we're going to have 2 more speakers that are in return. So Tom's going to give the individual perspective and kind of show how individual users go through their day, and then from the other side, how organisations are starting to respond to that, so how they're starting to explore the ways in which they can develop a presence within these environments. So we're going to have Pip Wallace from Chisholm Hill Gallery, and she's going to speak about a recent experiment that they've been running with Instagram residencies, so allowing individual artists or artists who are presenting in the gallery space at that time to sit in on their organisational profile, so to inhabit it and then kind of use it in the same way, I think, as they would do using the building. And then we're going to have Rebecca Sinker, who's come very nicely from her holidays. So thank you, even bigger thank you from Tate's project, Archives and Access. So it's going to see how habits that are formed within social media. So all the kind of things that we expect of social media, how organisations can use those as techniques to try and engage people in institutional environments such as these big digital archives, and find, use them as ways to kind of activate and engage people in the discussions of the archives. So that's me. I'm going to hand over to Tom now. And then, so we're going to go on. We're here until about 8:30. So I'm hoping we have a bit of time for Q&A, basically. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Cool. Hello. Hiya. So hi, I'm Tom. I work with Caroline on Video in Common and Art of Digital London now. So yeah, as Caroline was saying, we would have been looking for quite a while at online video and what that means for arts organisations and art producers, individuals and users and viewers and how they become users. So this is kind of like some of our most recent sort of thoughts around that, and sort of relating to the report that Caroline showed at the start. I'm afraid I'm going to read from a piece of text that we wrote, otherwise I'll just ramble off somewhere like useless. Okay, so to sort of set the scene of what we were talking about, is kind of wanted to run through a sort of typical day online in terms of culture. So in the course of writing this introduction to online institutionalism, I visited MoCA LA and watched 3 documentary shorts on the recent Mike Kelly retrospective held at the gallery in this summer. Watching these prompted me to send an email to get back in touch with a friend who'd actually been to the gallery and seen the show. After this, I scrolled down MoCA's playlist and lost 15 minutes of writing time to Alex Bagg on Cash from Chaos, Unicorns and Rainbows, an interview or guided tour through the archives of the New York public access cable show she made with Patterson Beckwith in the second half of the 90s. The video was part of a collection in MoCA TV's Art and Comedy YouTube playlist, and is actually pretty funny. So you can see that kind of up here. I checked in another of my worryingly few subscribed channels, the artist Jaco Palace Rouault. He'd uploaded a new video, Picasso, which was also embedded on his website. The video drew a characteristically droll comparison between Picasso and the problems of digital compression and codecs, and the narrator's own subjective pains of being an artist. You can see here his chest covered in lard behind a picture of the Guernica. Next, I finally attempted to watch the latest video hosted by Vdrome, which had been sat idle in an open tab for so long it actually become a different video, and it was Alexis Gideon's 2012 video Musics 2, Floating Oceans. It was pretty good, which is just that here. By 4 p.m, I was flagging and bored. MoCA TV, with 173,000 subscribers, became Munchies, with 294,000 subscribers. I've got none, by the way. And Lisa Queen taught me how to make brick chicken. For most of the day, and in fact most of that week, I'd had the Swedish music streaming service SoundCloud, or the London-based internet radio station NTS stream playing while I worked. 4 of my friends use Spotify more often than SoundCloud. The 78,000 views of Lisa Queen's Munchies videos dwarfed the 11,000 people who, alongside me, had also chosen to watch the Mike Kelly video, while only 6,500 had seen the video by Alex Bagg. I'm fairly certain I've only spoken to about 3 other people about Jaco's YouTube channel, but most of my friends or work friends know him, or at least of him, despite the fact he's more often than not in Helsinki and Finland. Why am I telling this story? On the one hand, this sounds like sort of breathlessly hyperbolic claims of any sort of social media tech head giving a TED talk. In this sort of boring consumer fiction, the world comes to me and I participate in it. In this narrative of empowered individualism, I seamlessly bridge that gap between the local and global, between personal and institutional narratives. In this version of events, the plethora of information I encounter and sift through on a daily basis is not only made meaningful, but is harnessed by me, the empowered user. But at the same time, more ambivalently, this is just the reality of how we can access cultural content today, and how it is increasingly important to an increasingly important site in our relationship between culture and cultural organisations. What's more, this is not just from the point of view of users or viewers, the consumers in this like relationship, for whom this change is happening, but this is also a situation artists, organizations, galleries, and publishers are having to react to, or actually by choice from the very beginning, for those who are becoming or actually a choice for those who are starting from this from the very beginning of their organization. So like Preteen Gallery and is based in Mexico City, and Cactus in Liverpool, their like Twitter feeds are as much, I suppose, in understanding the gallery space, there is as much kind of part and as important part of like the overall sort of feeling of what it means for that place to exist. And they're pretty funny as well. I mean, they're quite, they're very subjective, which is kind of in distinction perhaps to a more sort of rigorous authorial voice that you might get from a traditional institution. So we're tentatively, for the sake of this talk, calling this new way of experience or working with culture dashboarding. So what this refers to, by one means or another, cultural audiences can now experience art and engage in art discourse through a variety of online content dashboards. So these are things like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Vine, SoundCloud, your emails, basically these things that kind of aggregate and order and put in some sort of logical meaning the various stuff that other people are producing. Additionally, more often than not, all of these dashboards can be aggregated into a single device, such as a phone or tablet, and then more abstractly, we can say that these experiences aggregate into a user-generated coherence or cultural vantage point across the passing of a whole day's cultural consumption. So all of the stuff you see in the course of a day, the things that you sort of like look at when you're bored at 4 p.m. or choose to look at or remember to look at, these are all kind of start to make some sort of meaning, whether that's something kind of coherent or purely idiosyncratic. These are the sort of kind of subjective relationship to these things that happens in the course of a day. Here you can see a sort of different example, like this is a sort of hashtag for Frieze Masters. All the images that had the Frieze Masters hashtag over the course of the Frieze Art Fair and Frieze Masters Art Fair. This is a sort of more structured, organized way of doing the same sort of thing, which we're kind of proposing the user does in terms of like their subjective experience and choices that they're making. So ways of viewing art are becoming increasingly wrapped up in the ways in which the cultural content is organized. This is to say what we choose to follow, who we choose to follow in order to work out what to follow, and where we choose to follow this are increasingly coming to form a curatorial voice and even coming to form an institutional role in culture viewed online. In parallel, what is organized for the user and the way in which it is organized for them is being done in response and in anticipation of this expectation of the user to choose and select. And this is kind of like a generational thing. It's increasingly a generational thing. So YouTube's been something that we've been looking at quite a lot, and so one of the production managers for a kind of large MCN, which is Maker Studios, which is owned by Disney, which is a huge sort of production company for YouTube channels, has said that they did some research for Nielsen recently, and this is a quote, and shared some data. And we're seeing that, at least from our perspective, YouTube channel production companies are by far the largest distributor of content to millennials. So that's people born around the sort of 80s, 90s, of these millennials in the US. Are they watching broadcast? Some are, but I think that they are spending a disproportionate amount of time online, and I think the opportunity is to get marketers to understand this and where their audience lives. So there's a massive sort of shift in terms of where the sort of younger millennial generations are accessing their cultural content, and also a sort of attraction to that by the sort of production studios. So for those who view a good deal of their culture online, this is not a quote anymore. For those who view a good deal of their culture online, particularly those growing up where there is no memory of before the internet, the user as a selector is taking on an increasingly equivalent curatorial or editorial function to that of a cultural organization. cultural organisations are seeing that this is a space in which to participate and in which to generate engagement and dialogue as well. We'll see this in the examples of the Chisenhale Gallery and the Tate later on. In each case, though, at the centre of this new cultural authority or consumption is the user and the dashboard. I hope that's making some sense. So that's a kind of general assessment, or like a kind of general way in which we're trying to think through what this sort of the role of the dashboard or role of online video is, and also what it's kind of doing to the way in which we're engaging with cultural artifacts, content, stories, these kind of things. In the second part, I wanted to sort of lay out some key features that we've been looking at or trying to think about in ways in which to try and understand in more detail how these things are taking place, and how they kind of inform our choices around what accounts to follow or who or where we attribute authority to. So further characteristics of information feeds, how content is arranged, and the shape of this new way to experience art. So firstly, we were thinking around this idea of weak social ties. This comes from, in the way that we're using it at least, from the sociologist Mark Granovetter. And that was initially used to try and describe the strength gained in social networks by the weak ties between people. So these might be like a nod in the street between people, or like the relationship you might have with a shopkeeper, or like recognizing something in common that you might have, like have ordered the same meal as somebody in a restaurant. So they're not like as strong as like a 10-year friendship, but they do form a relationship. While these might not be as rooted as a long-term friendship, these weak ties act as bridges through which social life as a whole can scale from this sort of micro, from the two people recognizing each other, into wide-scale social networks. As these small interactions join other stronger networks, such as familial or long-term friendships, bridging various social networks together. So another way to look at this would be how we curate content feeds into dashboards. We can see that our peers and like what our peers like, and what our social networks or these dashboards see our peers like, and how that can kind of be joined through something as simple as the like, which is like in this one here, this bunk editions. Like two of the people that I know on Facebook also like this, and this would be a sort of bridge between all of the things I'm interested in and all the things they're interested in terms of this sort of specific space. So this is one of the sort of things that we've noticed or wanting to think about. And this happens on all of these sort of platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, who purposefully show us online social circles, likes or follows, and of our friends, and try and get these things to join. We were interested in how this kind of sits across different types of social networks as well. These visible selections or shares act similarly as weak ties or bridges, and allow our small choices to scale up to something resembling the cultural authority of an institution, which in the eyes of each user is both an individual and cumulative authority. This all makes it seem quite straightforward, though. It's not about the numbers so much as the types of people involved. Someone you deem to be the right friend, somebody who you might think is cool or something like this, might like some sort of niche organisation page. This might carry more weight than maybe several friends or like several people you vaguely know liking a big organisation's page. So the small bridge might be made to something you might never have had any contact with, can be as effective as an entire marketing budget of a larger organisation. So this is kind of like almost like word of mouth authority, but it kind of, in the way when we like think about it in terms of weak ties and how that sort of scales up in social networks, these sort of like word of mouth things can become something as substantial as, and mapped out in that way, as something like the kind of authority of a larger organisation with different sort of presence. One of the other things that we wanted to talk about was shared references, how the dashboard becomes like a sort of space where you assign authority to or through all the many choices you make, where the niche and the sort of huge can sit together. it's not necessarily, but if it's not necessarily nods or the price of milk that forms these weak tie bridges, and congregating on online dashboards, then instead we can look to things like shared, look to the things that are shared or published as these similar sort of bridges or contact points. These could be shared in the sense of being part of a collective cultural memory, an important event, things you only do if you're from a certain place, something we all buy, or the things that you literally sort of click share on. The inherent visibility of social media platforms online means that from afar, what you say and what you choose is to all intents perceived as your outwards identity. So in terms of like these shared reference points, they're the kind of like the bits of things that you can share and point to and sort of hope that other people might point to as well. So if this is obviously social media has had quite a long sort of history of doing this in terms of the feed, things that you want people to sort of like generate a conversation around. Obviously that's kind of like blown up recently in terms of like things like the meme or the memified songs or dance or these kind of things. These are sort of like shared references on a sort of global scale, but equally it's interesting to sort of compare and connect these two to the things of like the sort of communities that might generate around an artist's videos that they put up on YouTube, which may only get 3 or 4 views, but there's a sort of tiny little community forming around that. We've been looking at the various sort of ways in which this sort of has been taken up by arts organisations for whom joining in on a sort of meme like the Harlem Shake or something, which was like a few years ago, might not be the right sort of approach to going about it. So one of the things that we looked at was this YouTube channel by Novara Media. So one of the sort of main sort of catchphrases, I suppose, of YouTube is comment, share, like. As much as like you sort of like might click something or like reshare it, there's also a sort of impetus towards commenting and engaging and sharing of references and sort of describe and kind of generating a conversation around that. Particularly around YouTube videos. Should we play a bit of this? Yeah.
Hello, welcome to IMO with me, Aaron Bastani. You can follow me on Twitter, @Aaron Bastani. You can follow Novara Media on Twitter, @Novara Media. Feel free to comment on and share this video under the hashtag IMO Bastani. And make sure to never miss an episode by clicking the subscribe button just below. Thanks for watching. Last Wednesday saw a major protest in central London in solidarity with ongoing demonstrations
all of those sort of things that are actually sort of
and elsewhere in the
ancillary
United States,
to the
responding
actual
to the murder
message
of a young African-American,
what he's talking
Mike
about.
Brown, by a white police officer who will not be
they're all
indicted
sort of
for his
actually
actions.
inherently part of how these
While those
sort
protests are a particular response to the death of
communities
Brown,
build,
they're also a more
are,
general response to structural racism of policing and so
I
much
think that
more
we were trying
in the
to
United
figure out
States.
how
But
the
obviously
relationship
the problem
between
of
something
racist
that's kind
policing
of about the
and structures
structure of
white
it
supremacy
is
more
related
broadly,
to the
and
conversation
not
that they
limited
want
to the US. And that's
generate
why I
around
want to highlight
specific
today 3 points in relation to racist
specific
policing
discussions
right here
that
in
they're
the
having in
United
the video.
Kingdom.
And this
Number
is,
one, the numbers. The colour of your skin statistically has consequences for how you are treated by the criminal justice system. Those of Afro-Caribbean descent subject to court proceedings for drug possession offences are 4.5 times more likely to be found guilty than Caucasians, and they're subject to immediate custody at 5 times the rate. Number 2, they smear and lie about those they kill. Immediately following the verdict of Duggan's lawful killing by a firearms officer in the Met, the Daily Telegraph wrote how gangsterism, not racism,
so in terms
was the root of Mark
how this,
shooting.
generating sort of engagement through these sort of shared and sharing of references and sort of familiar
those conclusions represent the
conversations or things.
Of the lies that have been
Another one that we were
disseminated
particularly interested in was a project which is slightly
that there had been a shootout.
Slightly different is this Lives of the First World War project by the Imperial War Museum, which asked the public to help them build the stories of the 8 million people who were involved in the First World War. So it already kind of built a considerable digital archive of records and biographical data around a lot of the people who were involved in the First World War, but at the same time they're asking people to sort of participate, add the life stories to each of these sort of archival elements and components, and sort of connect up existing databases of war records to individuals and to groups such as local communities who are all conscripted together. So the reason that I kind of wanted to mention it here was that it's a really sort of compelling use of shared interest as a motivator to get people involved in what is quite a lot of archival work, and stuff that is is like quantitative, like qualitative, rather than sort of it's not like related content. These sort of stories and this sort of familial knowledge is very difficult to get into these type of archives, and it's the same sort of engagement that would be quite hard to get sort of published in association with publishing this video. It's the sort of discussion that happens around it, that happens when people share references and they kind of contact up against each other and builds that way. So while there's sort of distinct aims between the Imperial War Museum and the Enviromedia, what we're trying to unite all of these cases under is that there's communities of interest built through shared and the sharing of these references. So like the last sort of thing that we wanted to sort of highlight, and this is not to sort of step on Chisenhale's toes too much, is narrative in terms of dashboards. How do they work and why do people like work with them? Narrative is the sort of one of the primary logics of the feed. Narrative is the story or the hook in each shareable bit of content. What makes us come back to that content on the dashboards, as much as narrative is the release schedule in which we see it as a user in our personal narrative, as well as how it is delivered or released by whoever makes it. So narrative becomes a sort of ongoing process necessary to bringing together of these weak social ties and sort of shared content expressions of identity. It's the thing that sort of gives it some sort of meaning, whether that's personal or institutional, organizational, or whether it's internal to the sort of picture that you see. So what you're reading into it. This is not only because it's the best way to organize all the information that is produced, is meaningful in the sense that the story is also how we could say that we experience the world. And so lastly, the feed also creates suspense and tension in this everyday sort of experience that kind of comes popping out of like notifications and updates. Another sort of thing why we're sort of interested in narrative was because these sort of like shared references are kind of like these weak ties, like these sort of nods or likes or things that are not like built like a sort of strong long-term friendship. They need to be sort of constantly maintained and regularly redrawn in order to sort of stay meaningful. In the same way as a sort of artist catalogue or retrospective or press feature might solidify the cultural value of an institution or its exhibitions, here the cultural value assigned by the user and their community when it is the cultural value assigned by the user is redrawn each time an account or piece of content is revisited, added to, or related to by something else. Okay, so if the social network where these dashboard-based institutional sort of relationships or cultural authority given by the user are occurring, the shared and shareable references are the bridges through which that value flows. If so, then the narrative of the social feed in which the users are invested becomes the means by which these sort of institutional relationships are maintained. This new sort of like user-based, dashboard-based institutional relationship or cultural authority given to the various things that you see over the course of a day or through your narrative. Do we have time for a couple of examples of some artists dealing with this? Or
just do one maybe.
Okay, so this in terms of like artists dealing with this type of dashboard-based cultural content, Ed Fornielis is quite an interesting one. I think that Pip's going to talk a lot more about this, so maybe I'll just talk quickly about an artist, Holly White, who produces video blogs that tends generally to be on YouTube, but at the same time she produces sort of sculptural works. So these video blogs talk about the sort of description of a daily life and our experience of it with the platforms that structure that in the first place. So these are kind of like talking about what it's like to experience the sort of loneliness of social media, but then replayed back into that. I think it's kind of difficult to describe all of her video channels, so it's sort of definitely sort of worth just having a look at and feeding through and sort of seeing how the sort of progression of the narrative and the stories that she tells is also sort of deeply sort of like imbued with the logic of YouTube as producing a sort of like a certain type of loneliness, or allowing that to sort of like manifest or be spoken of or talked about. I suppose why we've sort of prefaced the dashboard or like the platforms or the role that they're playing is because we wanted to sort of raise the question, and this is not necessarily, we don't think, for us to answer, but as a sort of general conversation that should be had, is to what extent a kind of institutional role is being played by, not only by the users rather than viewers of culture, but also the platforms and the providers themselves, such as, in this case, YouTube, in previous examples, in Instagram or Facebook or even Google, in the way that they design the type of interaction or type of exhibition that can be occur through these various instances of cultural content. They're also designing the sort of knowledge or kind of discussion that can happen there, and type of choices, value, and connections that can be made. Lastly, there's another example that we were sort of keen to sort of bring up, was about how to archive and how to think about the history of these type of dashboarded, social media driven cultural relations and things like that.
Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily we've got much to say about it, it's just an interesting thing you should look at. Oh good, well there you go. And leading on.
Yeah, I hope that was...
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. So this is Pip from the Chisholm Hill Gallery, which some of you might know of around Mile End. And I've asked her along to talk today because they have quite an interesting project at the moment. As I said earlier, they're allowing their current artists exhibiting to take up residence in their Instagram organizational profile. So there you go.
Hi. Does everybody, who's familiar with Chisenhale Gallery? Has most people been there or know about it a little bit? So we're a contemporary art, independent contemporary art space just near Victoria Park. We're not-for-profit, so partially government funded, partially through philanthropics and foundations and private donors. And we focus on the presentation of new contemporary art, showing the work of artists, usually the first institutional exhibition they've had in London or the UK, and semi-local, sometimes international. And we've been instrumental in the first shows for many artists that you're probably familiar with, like Rachel Whiteread, Ed Aitken's, Wolfgang Tillmans. So Chisenhale has been around for 30 years and it has a long history of being a kind of turning point in a career of a young artist. I am definitely coming at this conversation from a curatorial artistic perspective. I have absolutely no experience in marketing or comms, and I also am not a tech person, so that's my disclaimer. So yeah, Chisenhale has decided to begin what we're calling the Instagram residency program, and we're treating it like any other residency program, and we're actually thinking about it in the same way that we're thinking about a couple of other residency programs we do. So I'll just show you how we've framed it. Oh, that's not me. So this is on our website, and you'll see there on the side we've got a section called Off-Site Projects, and under that is the Victoria Park Residency, the Create Residency and the Instagram Residency. So it's very much functioning for us as another creative space where work is produced and experienced as a artwork. It was a decision of Chisenhale not to have an Instagram account for a long time. We do have a Twitter account, which is we have I think 20,000 followers on that, I mean obviously because the visual is so important to the gallery context, it was decided to leave Instagram aside. And when Ed Fornielis came to Chisenhale to prepare his exhibition, it became evident that his practice has such a relevance to social media that it would be crazy not to somehow involve him in that, in the context of the Chisenhale exhibition. So Ed Fornielis is a young London artist. He's now living between London and Los Angeles, and he held an exhibition at Chisenhale between June and September of this year, October. And at the time, he took over the Chisenhale Instagram account wholly and began to accumulate followers and to post images that for him were intersecting with the exhibition rather than promoting it or paralleling it. Obviously, I think that that's a big conversation for us to have about where promotion and artistic content meet in this platform, and it's a very grey area, I think, and one that I'm just beginning to understand and think about in terms of curation. But to show you the Chisenhale Instagram account, here we have Ed Fornielis's posts beginning in mid-June this year. So his exhibition at Chisenhale was looking at the family as a traditional construct and how that is formulated today through marketing or through aspiration, consumerism, and how that shapes the way that we interact with family and outside of that. So a lot of all of his posts speak about that, and he arranged them. I think the format actually of looking at it on the computer is different to when you look at it on a, say, smartphone, where you get 3 in a row. So if you can imagine, this has quite a uniformity when you look at it on a smartphone, the 3 modern family pictures down here, followed by the 3 pregnant lady in a kind of row. So he has himself curated the aesthetics of it. And then also a lot of video content that he has produced specifically for this platform. So rather than using it to take photos of his work, it's very much another mode of production for him. It's worth kind of going a bit further into Ed's practice and why this was the artist that Chisenhale decided to launch into Instagram with. So he has always worked in concert with online platforms, using them to not only exhibit his work, but to also draw his work from. So one of his key works that he did in 2011, he used called Animal House. He had a group of people adopt personas from Facebook profiles of American frat kids. So they took kind of a particular frat kid as their character, looked at what was publicly available online through Facebook, and kind of method acting adopted that character, and then a video was shot where each of these people that Ed was working with came together and played their role while the cameras rolled, and that became a video work that is fairly terrifying. He has also used so that in that way he's kind of appropriating material from those platforms. He's also used them to aggregate material, which became part of the exhibition at Chisenhale. So just to show you what the actual exhibition looked like now that you've seen the Instagram profile. This is the the gallery at Chisenhale filled with a cacophony of sculptural, video, sound, 2D work, as well as a performer who lounged around on various objects and kind of looked bored and scrolled their phone. And so each character represented a member of a nuclear family in the kind of all-American style. And these, as you can see, the screens are perched around the gallery in various spots, and they were aggregating content from the web. So they would roll with 2 images at a time that would switch, and were a kind of disturbing combination of porn, people's Facebook accounts, cooking blogs, whatever's out there on the web. It was aggregated so that there was this, I guess Ed talks about it as a mirroring of what's online. So for him it was a way of replicating that experience of surfing the web, which Tom talked about before. And Ed does speak about this approach as a mirror rather than as a critique, but I think that reflection of ourselves through this exhibition is definitely drawing our attention to the way that social media works rather than just using it. So for example, with his Instagram account, he is putting images out there and then asking us to engage with them in the same way that we engage with his exhibition, as a kind of reflection of ourselves. So the other thing to say about Ed and his use of social media is that he's very much aware of the interaction that is required and how that shapes the way you use that platform. So his Instagram account, I think when we finished with Ed's residency on Instagram, we had the same amount of followers as we did the people we were following. So in Ed's style, he had followed every single person who had followed him. And so I think that reflects his use of the medium as a way of garnering material as much as producing himself. So that was a question that we had when it came time to finish Ed's residency on Instagram. So the format of the residency is that the artist showing in the gallery, the physical gallery at Chisenhale, has the residency during that time, and at the end it's handed over to the next artist. So when we'd come to the end of the Instagram residency, it was decided to continue it, but in the knowledge that the next artist was a very different kind of practice, and what would happen to our Chisenhale's Instagram account under the control of someone else. So the next artist is Cara Turing, who's a London painter, and she doesn't have a smartphone, and she's never had one, and she doesn't use Instagram, never used Instagram before. And so the question was, how does that work? We began by posting the pictures for her with no other intervention into them, but also it does have an effect in that you can see we're now, we've got more followers than we're following. So whereas Ed was busy following everyone, Cara has a much more passive approach to the platform. So, and you can see the change. Here we have just to mark the end of one and the beginning of another. And then from this kind of hyper revolting coalescing of pop cultural images, here you have this much more kind of cohesive reflection of Cara's painting interests in traditional painting. But it does speak to her practice in equally strong terms, in that Cara has decided, there was a discussion about whether she would credit the artists who painted these pictures, and she decided that she didn't want to, which speaks to the way that her paintings look. Where there's a kind of floating of unassigned images in her canvases, where you have a familiarity, but it's still kind of abstract and uncertain. And she wanted to do the same thing with her Instagram posts. So she's got a kind of I think of it as kind of like a cloud of inspiration that kind of hovers around the exhibition. So again, it's not re-imaging the exhibition, it's kind of contributing to it in that we get an insight into Kara's reference images that she's looking at when she's working. So I'll just show you a picture of the exhibition so you have a sense of the relationship as well. I'm giving myself away because you can see that I don't know any of the shortcuts. This is Kara's exhibition, so the same gallery space. Very different exhibition, very different audience for this exhibition in a sense. Chisenhale obviously has an ongoing audience, but here again, how do we transition from the people who, nearly 3,000 people who are following us to be following Ed? Now suddenly they have these very different images coming through on their feed, and for us it's definitely experiment. Will they continue to follow us? Will we get a different set of followers each time we do a residency? Is that a problem? Will we be introducing people to new artists who they perhaps wouldn't have looked at beforehand? So I guess what I'm saying is it's all a big experiment for us, and there's no clear sense of what will happen to the followers that we do have. I just wanted to show you a couple of other, switching between two things here, a couple of other projects just that have kind of shaped the way I'm thinking about this content at the moment. And that is Kaleidoscope magazine, the Italian art magazine, are also doing an Instagram residency program for artists. So while they don't have a gallery, they've chosen to use Instagram in a very similar way in that the artist is given full control. So this is, I think they're on the second artist now. This is the first one where they did Timothy Quinn, and he posted a series of images, videos, pictures of his work. It seems like a more fluid use of it. So some of it is promotional of the exhibitions that he's in, some of it is observational of what he's looking at, some of it is works in progress. I think each artist will have a very different way of using this. The other one I wanted to look at was the one that Tom brought up briefly, and here I'm stepping on his turf now in talking about Amalia Ullman, who I think if you talk about art on Instagram at the moment, you have to mention because it's been a project that has caught everyone's attention this year. Who's familiar with this project on Instagram? Does anyone know this work? No? So yes? No? A couple of people. Amalia Ullman is perhaps I'll find her Instagram. I feel like such a hoax speaking about it in front of Tom. She's a London artist, also working in LA, and in maybe January of this year, she began a project called Excellences and Perfections. I think it was April, actually. And in it, she used Instagram to create a character that she carried on with until September, creating scenes that were, we now know, fictitious. But I was watching from Melbourne, very intrigued about what this was and what was going on and how much of it was sincere and whether it mattered, whether it's sincere, and all those questions that Facebook and Instagram bring up. So she speaks about it as a 3-phase performance piece. Definitely she speaks about it in terms of performance, and that Instagram was the medium she chose to use. And she had a kind of transition through moving to LA, trying to become a celebrity, having a breakdown, getting a boob job, having redemption in this new clean lifestyle. And she was interested in going shopping, getting a new boyfriend. She was interested in the response from people watching all over the world who were either encouraging of her to have this boob job or giving her a hard time about it or making judgments on the character that she was proposing. She has since concluded the project, so no, that's not it. But she posted a kind of like finale shot that said this was a performance and it's now over. And she used things like hashtags to replicate the people that she'd been watching online. So kind of like little cutesy tags that referred to the culture of social media that she was critiquing. I think it's interesting, the question that I have in my mind when we're working with artists on Instagram in the gallery context is who's working and who's working for who, and what is the purpose of this Instagram residency. So if you're an artist, you're pretty much at work all the time anyway. And I heard a lecture by Joshua Simon, who's an Israeli curator and theorist at the ICA last week, and he talked about each Instagram post as I thought it was such a great analogy, Instagram post as a punch clock time card in the factory of subjectivity or self-creation. So each time you post an Instagram post, you're basically doing your day's work in the factory of creating yourself online, which is obviously all of our job now as contemporary subjects within neoliberalism. You know, we're all creating ourselves each time we post a picture. I think that's the context that Amali is critiquing, and also what's on my mind when we ask an artist to produce extra content alongside an exhibition. They're suddenly, 10 o'clock at night, busy posting a photo on Instagram, and is it an artwork and is it a marketing tool? And I think these things are still being worked out within the institutional context at places like Chisenhale. The other question that we have when we're doing this is obviously branding and what happens when you give over control to an artist who may or may not be kind of on the same page as you about how your organisation sits. And I think that that's a risk that some organisations are able to take and some aren't. And as a small organisation that specialises in contemporary and new art, it's kind of our remit to take those risks. And so it's exciting to think that our use of Instagram is a response to these still uncertain questions. I've worked for other organisations who've talked about doing it and haven't been able to give over the control because obviously it's the public face of the organisation. Am I done? Yeah, okay. Yeah. And then I just thought, if you haven't seen them, things like, one more, sorry, I'm nearly done. So Amalia's project has been captured for all time by Rhizome, the online journal and digital art specialist, in a archiving tool, a specially designed archiving tool that is going to allow them to capture this new art form, which is digital art online, using, artists using Instagram not as a marketing tool but as a platform for creation. So they've created this way that now we are able to go and look at Amalia's Instagram account even when Instagram no longer exists, whenever that may be. So that's a really interesting development in categorising and archiving, which I'm sure that we'll hear a bit more about now.
And again, that plays on the agency that these third-party services play when you put all your stuff on there and they go down. You don't have it anymore unless you back it up. How do you present it in the same context again? So yeah. Anyway, thank you very much.
Good.
That's great. So next up we have Rebecca from Tate. We're going to go on until about 25 past, if that's okay. After that, I thought we'd have time for Q&A, but there never seems to be time. No, it just happens. But we're going to go to a pub across the way, which I can't remember the name of. The Red Lion. yeah, so please come join. Yeah, there's maybe, I will maybe say that one thing at the end again.
Say whatever you like.
Yeah, okay. About the report.
Yes?
Research.
Yeah,
okay?
sure.
Okay.
I'll try and be quick.
Okay, well, no, don't rush me. So yes, everybody, this is Rebecca. She's here to talk about archives and access. And again, it's different. So I don't know how you've taken up this talk, but in the context of everything that we've spoken about already, it's how these large institutions who kind of build up these kind of very vertical authoritative positions, how they can start to work online as well in a kind of a rather flat horizontal position where there's a lot of participation. Yes, sorry, let's run in.
Yes, so hi, I'm Rebecca Sinker. I'm Curator of Digital Learning at Tate. And so, I would just like to say that I'm from the Learning Department and part of a big project that I'm going to tell you about. But my interest is particularly in the affordances of digital technology for learning through and about art and with artists. So I'm not from a marketing perspective and either. And to some, I mean, I'll touch on issues of social media with this project, but actually this is more about, as Caroline said, you know, a really large institution with a large collection, the collection of which is already digitised and online, digitising more of the content, more of the hidden content, in this instance, the archive, and putting that up online, in large part for people to actually access it, for many more people to access this, but also to think about different ways in which people might want to encounter and engage with and work with, and in fact, as you'll see, contribute their own content alongside. So that's what I'm going to talk about now. So Archives and Access is a large 5-year HLF-funded project, and it involves partly a capital fund to transform and open up aspects of Tate Britain to new audiences. And it also, so it's about creating new gallery and learning spaces, as well as a substantial digitisation project. Tate holds the largest archive of British art in the world, stretching from 1900 to the present day. It contains 750 collections, over 1 million items, and it's a physical space that people can come and visit. It's free, you can book and come. It's part of the library, so you can come and look through this material, but necessarily that's limited to the people who can physically come, and it's actually quite a small space. And it's probably one of the best kept secrets at Tate. So one of the reasons for this project was to make a much broader public aware of the fact that this archive even exists, and then through the digitisation give many more people access to digitised versions of that material. And this is our official aim, to lead the cultural heritage sector in transforming the way that people can access, engage with and learn about cultural heritage. So as I said, the project includes new physical spaces. So there's a new archive gallery within Tate Britain on the lower level, and this has a rotating display of physical materials and other types of material that are kept within the archive. This is the current show, which is about life drawing. It contains a lot of life drawings by artists, but there are also some interesting videos looking at the history of life drawing in the art school as well, which was part of an associated research project that we were doing. And there are 5 new learning spaces, including a dedicated digital studio, where we do other aspects, more sort of face-to-face aspects of digital learning and digital making. And those can be anything from having virtual link-ups with national and international partners, They are some of our kind of drop-in social events, doing things similar to some of the things that have been talked about, sort of mobilography, Instagram, GIF animation through our later Tate series, or they might be more sort of long-term engaged workshops using digital production tools or coding or other kinds of digital making. It's still relatively new, this space, so we're just still developing it and testing it out. So Archives and Access involves taking a portion of the artist's archive, specifically 52 collections from that 750, which is 50,000 items. And the first tranche of these was released publicly this week. So we are still in the phase of finding out what the reception for this is likely to be. In terms of what the content is, we had a sort of range of criteria to think about which collections we might include in this. So we wanted to ensure that there was a broad spread representing the kind of cultural heritage that's represented within the archive. Men and women, living and not living artists from all over the country, working in lots of different media. And we also wanted to ensure that we had some very well-known artists, people like Henry Moore and Barbara Hepworth, and then a number of other artists who many people wouldn't have heard of. So to really kind of raise the visibility of their practice. There were also issues around ensuring that through the digitization there was an active preservation, if you like, of this material as well. Some of it is very fragile and not very easy to be seen by many people, and through digitizing precious items from the archive, this allows them to be seen more often by many more people. And this is the lucky 52. And 15 of those are already released in the first tranche. Just a little bit about how these are appearing on the web. So this is a look at web traffic to the Tate website. We have about 14 million visits a year, I think. And the vast majority of those are to our online collection. Nearly 37% of users come to look at the online collection. And you can see way down the bottom, Archive Online Public Access Catalogue, the third one up. 0.05% currently were, or before this week, were coming online to access the archive catalogue to get information about archival works. As you might expect, it's quite a specialist data set, and it's also, it's mainly academics, curators, art historians who are looking at that particular information. But with the digitized materials, what the project has allowed us to do is not just digitize the material, but actually integrate the archive catalogue, which is on the CALM database, for anyone who's familiar with that, and the museum collection catalogue, which is on the museum system. So these are two different databases, and it's taken 2 years to build the infrastructure so that those databases are fully integrated, which means for the user, they're getting a smooth experience and they're searching both at the same time. And this is actually quite unusual, and it was quite a big step to be able to do that. And what this actually means in terms of raising the profile is that 37% who come and search the collection anyway are now going to be coming across digitized archive items, which they wouldn't have done if we'd kept them separate, because it would still probably have been that very specialized audience. Something else that we're doing as part of the project in terms of addressing access and raising awareness is being aware of the fact that there are not only areas where people have less digital access, there are also areas where people have less access to local cultural resources. When we put the bid together 3 years ago, we were looking at the Race Online report and identified these areas as places where we hadn't necessarily done work before, but also areas that might have had both less digital and cultural access. So we've set up a sort of partnership project with key partners in all of these areas, and we've started the first of these as a pilot in South Wales. So we're working with the Joseph Herman Art Foundation in Cymru. It's a small voluntary organisation in a small town called Ystrad Ganlais. It's in the Swansea Valley, and like many of the towns and villages around there, it's an ex-mining community. It's also an incredibly rich cultural community. There are artists, writers, there's a long history of music around there, and particularly through the miners' welfare halls that are littered across that area of the countryside, there are spaces where those communities come and share cultural events. And so it's been fantastic for us to take the material that we have on this not very well-known Polish emigre artist, Joseph Herman, who came as a refugee to Britain at the outbreak of war, escaping Nazi persecution. He was very interested in documenting the life of the worker. He came from a mining community in Poland, and through sort of left-wing organisations and trade unions, he found out about the mining communities in Wales. He went in order to sketch there and work there for a couple of weeks, almost in a residency. He ended up settling there for 11 years. He really found, if you like, a home for himself. And so we have part of his collection, and part of his collection is at the Joseph Herman Centre Cymru. And through the project, we're able to actually gain much more information about that artist and the context of his work. And that material is what's going to come online and actually embellish, really, the knowledge that the institution has about the artist through this online project. So that's just one of the examples of the outreach programme. The others are in Liverpool, working with Tate Liverpool and Alderhay Children's Hospital, Tyne and Weir, the Lang Art Gallery, and a number of further education organisations up there, Margate Turner Contemporary, and then in the final year we're coming back to London, and we're going to be working with our young people's group, who are working with other young people's groups. They'll be leading it to look at the sort of diverse cultural heritage and youth arts and sort of emerging practices, particularly I think through social media, which is much of the work that they do now in London in 2016. So I'll just give you a quick look at Okay. Thank you. All right. I'm honestly not trying to sell you stuff from the Tate shop. Our marketing team is trying to sell you stuff from the Tate shop. So Art and Artist is the section where you can search the catalogue online. And now we have search art and sketches, letters, etc. And this is what takes you through to the archival material. There's a landing page that gives you an overview of what this content actually is, because, as I say, a lot of people have no idea what the Artist Archive is. So it gives you a sort of sense of the kinds of materials, the documents, sketches, photographs, sketchbooks, and ephemera that are actually held within the archive. Talks more about the project. There's a film series that we're making as well that give more insight into the sort of stories behind the archive. There's a blog which has contributions. This project it's a big project. You might have got that impression from what I've said. It involves 12 different departments at Tate. There's never been a project that's had that kind of interdepartmental work before. I tell you, it's a miracle that we've done it. It's really hard to work across departments at Tate, and the fact that we've not only been doing it for 2 years and we've managed to produce this stuff is pretty miraculous in itself. But it's really interesting in the sense that the blog actually is part of the dissemination, really. It not only documents the process, but it also lets the sector know, because there are a lot of these kind of digitization projects happening, exactly what's involved in that. So anything from the sort of photography department, the cataloguing, the copyright clearance, all of the different elements of what come together to use this, to make this, sorry. So I'll just have a quick search for some of the work that's in there. So Barbara Hepworth, as you might imagine, has a lot of work in the collection, but we've also digitised all of her sculpture records. So she was an artist who was very aware of her own kind of profile, PR almost, and was quite adamant about how she recorded her own work in practice. And so she recorded every single sculpture she ever made, and all of those sculpture records are now online. And where there's a connection between a work in the sculpture record that you can scroll through here, we've also put that in so there are you'll find as you go through, there are links through, so if there's a work in the Tate collection as well as in the sculpture records, you'll be able to interconnect between those two. Another of the artists who we've included in this first tranche is Nigel Henderson. Some of you may be familiar with him. He was one of the independent group, a colleague and associate of Paolozzi. We have a smaller number of works of his in the actual collection, but we have a massive number now of photographs from his archive, more than 3,000. If you look on this tab here to find the results, you can search by artwork. There are 17 of them, or over 3,000, as I say, archive items, the vast majority of which are his photographic records. And because these are archival records and they're catalogued and managed differently from collection works, when you go into the individual works, you'll get the usual tombstone information, but you'll also, because they're archival, get the hierarchy. So you'll get a sense of what this work is in the hierarchy of the other contents there. So in the case of photographs, you'll get the full contact sheet. So you'll be able to see all of the works that were taken on that same roll of film, and see all the connections between those, and see how those connect up the chain to the bigger collections. Can I ask
a question?
Yeah, you may.
Maybe something I'm about to get to, but if you scroll up a wee bit.
Yeah.
There's a couple of buttons there which are very important.
Yes, I'm going to get to those.
Sorry.
Sorry. I mean, to be honest, I could talk to you for a week about the actual content here as well. But yes, I'll get to the other stuff quickly. Just wanted to mention one more thing about this, and that's that the indexing, which allows you, because we've created an expanded content index, it just allows you to make these really nice interconnections through the different terms that have been applied to the material. So with this work being indexed as street, if you then click on street, what you get is a really nice sort of trans-historical look at all of the works in the collection and the archive that have that term applied to them. And so it's just a really nice way of searching.
It just makes the whole it makes it completely transparent, all that kind of structure.
Exactly.
Knowledge.
Yeah. So, thank you for pointing me towards this. So, apart from getting all of this material online, I mentioned that it actually was offering us a chance for users to have to create a different relationship with the content. So not simply us being a publisher of this material, but actually for users to be able to start collecting and curating little collections for themselves. And that's what the album feature is. So here, I'm not actually logged in, and I'm not going to do it because it's going to take too long for this session. But basically, if you log in just with an email, you are then able to add any work that you see in the collection or archive through your searching to what we've called an album. And if I just go to the albums feature, here we are. See, still in beta. Send us your feedback. Basically, what this allows you to do, as those giant colourful buttons suggest, is to add your own content together, to collect your content, to upload your own content, and then to share that with others.
Yeah, that's a really cool feature.
So if I just show you one example, because I know we're running out of time, just to see how this has been used. So we've had over 400 of these already created, and as I say, we only launched publicly this week. We soft launched about 6 weeks ago, so lots of people found it without us telling them about it, and sort of figured out how to use it and started working on it themselves. So if I just jump through the tagging to here. All right, Landscape of South Wales. Okay, so this is an album made by a user, and it includes 2 works from the Tate collection, Lowry's Hillside in Wales and the Becker's Pitheads, and 4 works from this person's own personal content, so user-generated content. So we've got a photograph, we've got some audio that she's recorded, which is a really nice little spoken piece describing the landscape of South Wales, which is on SoundCloud. We've got a video from Vimeo, which is a schools project, looking at this artist, Joseph Herman, who I mentioned earlier. And we've got a personal historical photograph from her family, Auntie Meg and the gang at Porthcawl. And so that's just one example of this new sort of ability to mix people's own content with the Tate content, to make new meanings out of it and to make more personalised meanings. And then, of course, the ability to share that across different platforms for people to see. So I'll just leave it on the slideshow because we're nearly out of time.
No, I think that's great. I'm really glad I've seen that.
Okay.
So it's down to see it for
so go sign up and play, and then tell us what you think. The only thing I didn't mention there is there is a comments feature on that as well, so people can start sort of commenting on each other's, and you can also, although you can't copy other people's content, if somebody makes a really nice collection of Tate art and archive work, you can duplicate that and then recreate it in your own way and add your own content to that as well. And we're just finding that people are doing this in all sorts of ways because of personal interest. We've got several up there that are clearly teaching resources. Some of them have even got City Lit titles on them. So people are already starting to use it in different ways, as we hope. So. And how effectively are when they're uploading? Obviously, they're adding it to certain things that you already have an eye on or have the ability to describe. When they're describing things, how accurate are you asking them? Are you looking at what they're putting together, or maybe that's it's complete. I mean, as long as it abides by our terms and conditions, which are about 4 pages long, and I don't suppose anyone reads them, but and the main things are that it's legal, and it's not breaking copyright, it's not, offensive, it's not libelous, etc. If people spell things badly or write things in another language or do things that are not necessarily, they're not sanctioned by Tate, that's the whole point. This is other people's voices. It's still early days, so I'm sure we'll be challenged in many ways by this. But the point is to sort of meet those challenges as and when they come.
And it's uploaded rather than like with the SoundCloud. Is that an embed or?
The SoundCloud, the sound and video basically embeds because we can't. If this took off, we just don't have the server capacity. There are moderation issues as well, but people's images are uploaded.
Yeah, brilliant. Great, thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, great. I have 2 more minutes. I just want to say one thing. Is that okay? So I suppose I just want to explain why I was dying to get Rebecca here today. Is because over the summer the Tate ran. Okay, so I just want to point this one thing out, and I want to kind of suggest that anybody who's interested would read it. So the Tate, obviously, they're big forerunners in any kind of digital experimentation and culture, and they got together with the RCA and South Bank University, and with an AHRC grant, they ran this research project called Cultural Value in the Digital, and they did so. A lot of it was based on Tate examples. Is that fair to say? Like case studies.
Case study, but lots of other organisations came and contributed as well.
And then, so that's in the summer, we had a few members in the room speaking at this series of seminars. And then from that, if you go to this page, I would suggest you go and read the findings, because it really articulates the problem that larger institutions are having, as I said, being these kind of vertical bodies, and trying to move into these really rather two-way networked and open and unknown environments. And I suppose another interesting point that I think we're going to get to in the pub more than here was that of those environments, like with the Instagram feed and kind of feeling a little bit uncomfortable asking an artist who you've already asked to exhibit, to inhabit your space, what does it feel like when you open your artists up to like unknown audiences in places like YouTube, as with the BMW Live series. So an interesting outcome was that they felt that the most appropriate place for Tate to try and experiment in these new ways of working was to use the practices that have been developed in education and learning departments.
I'm not sure if appropriate is the right word. I don't know that Tate made a decision, because Tate is a many multi-headed hydra. I think the fact is that the areas that who are pushing the practice forward are learning and research, and in some ways the sort of social media teams. And I think that the other areas have not really got to grips with it. But I don't know that there's a general consensus that they think that's the most appropriate.
Okay. No, that's good. Thank you for clearing that up. Right, I'd like to say thank you very much for coming. No Q&A tonight, so if you want to ask any questions, you've got to go to the pub. Yes, thank you to all our speakers. As I said, this is our last Art of Digital London for 2014. We're going to have another one in March 2015. More news about that. If you want to find out, you have to join our meetup group, basically, so please join.